Good morning, everyone. So today we are going to go for a Lord of the Flies walk and talk. Now, I know that you're ready for all of this excitement and enthusiasm, and believe me, we are all excited to make a start on this as well. So we're looking at Lord of the Flies. We know that for this particular exam, we get a choice of 2 questions. We know that generally speaking, it's likely to be a character question and a theme question. So 2 questions that I've prepared from earlier are these. Do you think Ralph is an important character in Lord of the Flies? Write about how Golding presents Ralph in Lord of the Flies and how Golding uses Ralph to present ideas about people and society. Or how does Golding present leadership in Lord of the Flies? Write about what examples of leadership are presented by Golding and how Golding uses Ralph and Jack to explore ideas about leadership. Now, I always recommend that you tend to go with the theme question, only because you tend to be able to write about way more things. So you're able to write about different characters, you're able to write about other themes as well. So for me personally, I would say that this question about leadership would be the easier one to write about. So what I'm going to do when I've got that question in front of me is highlight those key words. So I'm looking at the question and I know that I've got to talk about leadership in Lord of the Flies. What you will always get for this question as well is a series of bullet points that suggests recommended material or recommended ideas for what you should put in your answer. So in this case, examples of leadership presented by Golding. And here it's given you 2 characters to focus your answer on. So how Golding uses Ralph and Jack to explore ideas about leadership. So what I want you to do now is write that question down in your exercise books. You're going to need that in front of you to write your answer. So let's go, let's write it down. And I'm going to do the same. Now, obviously in your exam, you're not going to have to write down the question because you have it there in front of you. Okay, so I've got it written down in my exercise book. I'm going to make sure that I've highlighted those keywords so I know exactly what I've got to be talking about. And the next thing that I have to be considering is my plan. That's what I have to be thinking about. So what am I going to do in order to be successful in writing this particular answer? So remember, this is the only question in your literature exam where you're not going to be given an extract from the text. So it's really, really important that you have a bank of quotations that you know off by heart. If you're thinking about what revision you could be doing to prepare yourself for the PPEs and for your exams in the summer, getting a key selection of quotations that you can rely on and use repeatedly is going to be really, really helpful. That's my #1 tip for you. Get those quotations so that you've got them there to use. Ones that I've got and have passed out are here, but if you need a copy of that, then do give me a shout. So I'm going to be using those for today. Right, we get to our plan. Now, the first thing I want to be talking about are kind of key words that link to that main idea, leadership. So all throughout my answer, I have to be referencing this word, that key word. And I want to be thinking, okay, what elements of leadership are present in this particular novel? So in my plan, I'm literally going to list as many words as I can think of when thinking about leadership in this novel. So I'm going to go with autocratic, that idea of totalitarian dictatorship. I'm going to go with democratic, the idea of having a vote, having a chance to have your say. Okay, I'm going to think about governance, authoritarian, and please don't worry if you don't know what these words mean at this particular time. You can use these, write them down, and then you've got something to look out for, haven't you? You can go home and research what these words mean because you want to be using them in your answer. I'm thinking about power, I'm thinking about class. Okay, so they're my words that are going to link to the main idea in that question. Then I'm going to think about some key quotations that I know I've remembered, because you'll go into that exam knowing exactly those quotations that you want to use. So really quickly, I'm going to put something like, we've got to have rules. The conch shattered. I ought to be chief. And this is now a moment where you can quickly write down any other quotations that you remember. So just spend a minute now writing any quotations that you remember. If you've got the quote sheet in front of you, this one here, you can pick some from here as well. And remember, quotes can be singular words. It's absolutely fine to have singular words to write down. So just spend that minute now writing down any quotations you can remember. Okay, I'm just writing down who says the quotes as well next to them. I'm trying to choose a range. So I've got the narrator, I've got Jack, I've got Ralph. Okay, now hopefully, because you've been revising these quotations, it's going to take you a minute to write them all out. But just in case, I've written a couple down there that you can use. The final thing then that I want to include in my plan is any kind of my contextual links. What elements can I bring in that helps me refer to context? So I'm going to put in World War II, Cold War. I'm going to put in some key kind of figures that I think were relevant in Golding's depictions of these characters. I want to make some reference to the religious imagery that's included. I'm going to talk about the characteristics that are relevant, so the id, the ego, and the superego. And remember, so many links cross over with Jekyll and Hyde. So it's really, really worth learning these elements because there's so much overlap. And I might even have a chance to reference Roy's private schooling if I get the chance. So I've just got a couple of ideas there. I might get to all of them, I might not, but at least I've got a checklist then for me. So I've got that plan to refer to. So now it's about writing our answer. We've spent about 5 minutes doing that. We'd go to our answer. Now, those of you that are really, really on it and have been doing all your preparation, you're going to go straight into your introduction, the one that your teacher has gone through with you and the one that they have recommended you learn off by heart. So that's exactly what we would write down now. Okay, so what I'm going to put, I'm going to go to my next page. Pause here if you need to, but otherwise I'm going to go to the next page. And I'm going to start my answer. So I'm just going to put here, write down, learnt introduction. Now, if you've got 5 minutes to do so, can you please write that down now with your teacher? So there should be an opportunity now to write it down with your teacher. You've got 5 minutes, write down that learnt introduction or as much of it as you can remember. Okay, so hopefully you will have now written down your 2 or 3 sentence summary, which is your introduction that you've done with your class teacher. Okay, that summary just gives you the chance of mentioning some key themes which are present in the novel. And what you're then going to do is write a sentence which links to the question. So in this case, we have to write down a sentence which links to leadership. So what I've tried to do here is write that summary. So I've put, this novel could be a way of questioning the impact of poor leadership and the way in which human society is able to decline into savagery without rules and order. So that last little sentence of my introduction, which you guys are going to write down now, enables me to link to the keyword, which is leadership. And I talk about the impact that it's having as a novel, so what Golding is trying to do with it. And I've already embedded some quotations from the text. Okay, so write that down now. And then we're going to go into our paragraph. So when I'm thinking about writing my paragraph, I know I have to make these links to leadership. And what I'm going to do, I've got my plan on the next page. I'm going to keep referring to that plan because I want to be using those keywords. I want to be including those quotations. And where I can, I want to be making reference to those contextual links. And what I'll do is as I'm writing it in, I'll tick them off. And I know then that I've tried to incorporate as much as I can from my plan, which is why it's really important to write one, guys. It means you won't forget things. So I'm going to start off really simply and I'm going to make a reference to Lord of the Flies. So in Lord of the Flies, because that's the text that we're talking about, the theme of leadership. So again, I'm making that reference to that key question, that keyword in that question, is used by Golding to comment on the varying portrayals of governance on the island. So already I'm making it really, really clear that I understand this novel is a construct made by the author. So the author is doing things deliberately. Golding makes deliberate decisions to portray characters and themes in a certain way. And here I've used governance, another way of saying leadership, okay, because I'm talking about how the boys are run on the island. So Golding's microcosm is a depiction of what happens when the desire for power corrupts and leads to tragedy. As from the very beginning of the novel, we see Golding introduce the power introduce the power struggle between autocratic and democratic leadership. Now, what you'll notice is that I've used some keywords. I'm just going to put these in purple for you, and I'll do a little tick list on my plan as well, because I want you to see that I'm using them from my plan as much as I can. I'm trying to make that reference. So I know I can tick these off on my plan and say, yep, I've used them. What you'll also see is that I've given a broad overview of leadership. So before I even start talking about the characters, I'm trying to say generally in the whole novel, what is leadership like? So broad overview of leadership. So that's how I'm starting my answer. So when I'm thinking about my plan and I'm thinking about the theme, I'm thinking about how is it presenting, how is it presented in the novel as a whole? And then what I'll do is I'll zoom in and I'll focus on specific characters. So I've done my kind of overall summary, then I'm going to zoom in slightly. So initially, now already just by writing the words beginning and initially, I'm talking about where I'm focusing my efforts on in the book. So that's context as well, because I'm talking about certain parts of the story. So initially, we have Ralph, whose angelic depiction, so he looks very angel-like, of fair hair and eyes that proclaimed no devil, illustrate his kind nature. Thanks, guys. And the way in which he is able to gather trust from the group so quickly. So I'm focusing in on one character. I'm embedding a range of quotations with fair hair and eyes that proclaim no devil. And I'm making a comment on the type of leader that he is. So the fact that he's able to gain trust shows that he is a leader who people are able to trust. They believe in him. This is one of many biblical references in the novel. So we're making that link to the Bible. Which points to the potential the boys have to create a new Eden on the island. And when we think about that original description, so the very first description we encounter of the boys, we see this tropical paradise. It seems really lush. The water is, sparkling, but there's this hidden sinister element with the darkness and the shadows, with the coconut skulls. So although it's seen as this paradise, we know that lurking beneath, there is that suggestion that something might go awry, something bad might happen. And perhaps that's Golding commenting on human nature. Our facade, the way that we look, the way that we appear might appear, great, trustworthy, fantastic, but hidden inside, lurking, we have that ability to be sinister, to be evil. And again, you can see those links with Jekyll and Hyde, can't you? So I'm going to carry on. So this is my opportunity now. I've embedded some quotations, but I really need to go into a little bit more detail. So while fair refers to the colour of Ralph's hair, I'm just going to whiz in here, and the light colour has positive connotations in itself. So we think of, angelic depictions of innocence, naivety, and just being good. The reader is also reminded of ideas of fairness and democracy. So again, making that link to leadership. This is further developed through the use of dialogue, we'll have hands up like in school. Okay, and then we're going to talk about that presentation of Ralph. So he's frequently portrayed using inclusive pronouns. Such as we, us, our. To illustrate the fact that while he's been chosen as leader, all the boys on the island are part of a democratic community. And I'm going to tick off that keyword again because I've used that from my plan. You can say well done to yourself for managing to get it in. Now, if I wanted to make this really, really good, I'd look back at some of these bits of evidence and I'd explore them in more detail. So if you want to have a go at doing that, have a go at doing that now. So you could focus on these pronouns. You could also go up and look at eyes that proclaim no devil. Make more links to the religious imagery there. And also will have hands up like in school. What does that suggest about his type of leadership? So I'm going to write in here. In addition, Ralph's suggestion to have hands up implies. Okay, and now's your opportunity to put that in. What is that implying about his type of leadership? Okay, off you go, have a go. Okay, so you might want to include something like that this is what Ralph is used to due to his education. Okay, so we know that he's privately educated. We know that Golding too was a teacher in a boarding school and therefore has that link with education, especially in an all-boys setting, but also the way in which we conform to this civilized behavior in our society. So we could even have made references to Roger's arm kind of hanging there, waiting, Jack's arm, sorry, hanging there waiting before stabbing the pig. And therefore, Ralph represents possible leaders, including Churchill, who gave the people a voice and allowed them to communicate their views. And Ralph does this through using the conch. And we're going to go into that a little bit more. So that's where I would take it next. So if I wanted to add more to this paragraph, I'd talk about how Ralph uses the conch. I'd talk about the way he reacts to the savage behavior. And I might even make a reference with the way that he uses Piggy as well. So I would say that Ralph isn't necessarily a confident leader. He has Piggy beside him, advising him and giving him snippets of information to help him be a good leader. But he doesn't have that authoritative approach like Jack does. And therefore, I would use that as a way of arguing his type of leadership and whether or not he is successful or not. But I want to try and get in a little bit more just so that you get the other side to this paragraph. So I would try and include these things if I wanted to in my answer. And then I'd obviously write about the other person in this novel who we know is the complete opposite of Ralph. So we talk about Jack. Okay, so if I was talking about Jack, I then want to show that I understand they are completely different leaders and they are completely different characters. So I'm going to put that in. So, but when contrasted with Jack, I'm going to put, so, but when contrasted with Jack, who had who knew his own mind, okay, I'm going to let you quickly write that down before I turn the page. The reader is alerted to the opposites arising on the island. Okay, and again, we're thinking about how Golding is using structure, how he's using these opposites. Okay, so it's all been done deliberately. Also, you can see the link here with Jekyll and Hyde again. It's going to keep coming up, guys. Okay, and that at some point, conflict will ensue. So conflict is going to take place. As these clashes in personality are forced to collide. Okay, so we know there's going to be conflict on the island. Straight away, they don't agree. Right, Golding lived in an era. So can you see that I've done a little bit about, I've obviously written a paragraph about Ralph. I've started writing a paragraph about Jack. I want to try and get in that contextual information where I can. So where I can embed it and make it part of my answer, that's going to show that I'm writing in a sophisticated way. Okay, so he's writing it in an era of totalitarian leaders. So those who are dictators, such as Hitler. Okay, and there's our link with World War II, Franco. Talk about Mussolini. And it's drawing on these. In his characterization of Jack. Okay, so we've got a very different type of leader here, and we're acknowledging that. When establishing the founding rules, for their new society, Jack's priorities are clearly violent. And authoritarian. Okay, so I've got another one of my keywords that I can tick off as well in my plan. We'll have lots of rules. Then when anyone breaks them. Okay, last bit now, guys. Well done, you're doing really well. The emphasis on lots. So this is where I'm going into detail, trying to show that I understand the text and why the language has been used. Okay, so now I'm analysing why the writer has used lots. While the sinister, unfinished sentence clearly foreshadows the savage punishments Jack will inevitably dish out later in the novel. Okay, so once again, I've talked about kind of structural ideas, that idea that we're getting that knowledge beforehand of what Jack is going to be like, and we're getting those clues and hints of what he will be like later. So then if I'm finishing off that paragraph, I'm going to want to explore that quotation in a little bit more detail. So that's what I'm going to pass over to you now. So how would you develop that in more detail? Think about the idea of rules. What does that suggest about Jack as a leader? Why is that ironic that he would talk about having lots of rules. Okay, and get that in. So I'm going to put in irony. And then this idea that anyone that breaks them. So I want to talk about the violence. And maybe I'll talk about chief. Okay, so off you go, guys. You're going to have a go at writing that now. And then what I would expect you to do is to go through and highlight it. Use that key that we always do. What evidence has been included here? What terminology has been included here? And have I put in enough analysis to show that I understand the language that has been used? Now, in this particular question, students don't tend to do as much analysis of key, of specific words, because they don't have that extract in front of them. Don't let that be a habit for you. Please make sure that you've got those quotations learnt so that you can break it down and analyze in detail, and then you will get your marks for doing that. Okay. Off you go then, guys.